we interviewed somebody who spent hours talking to Jeffrey Epstein in the Metropolitan Detention Center. Some of the stories that you're going to hear are just wild.
But did you ask whether he believed that he would commit suicide?
Oh, yes. Mark, I have such an interesting Jeffrey Epstein story, and I had never heard this before. There is a woman by the name of Vicky Ward. She is a journalist, really, really smart. And we are doing a documentary on how Jeffrey Epstein was able to basically ensnare presidents and princes and titans of industry and all. You know, how this, college dropout was able to do that. So we interviewed her as part of this. Vicky told me this story, that in 2003, she was writing a profile on Jeffrey Epstein. And And
for those who aren't in the weeds, that's before his conviction.
Right. And because he was this mysterious guy in New York City and people knew who he was, but there was never anything really written about him. So she said that it was initially going to be about, his finances and how he was able to make all this money for people and for himself. And she started interviewing people. And all of a sudden, it got really, really creepy. And Jeffrey Epstein was asking her over and over, what are you writing about me? Are you saying anything negative? And then there was a point where he said, are you writing anything about any girls or any women? I don't remember whether she said girls or women, but it stunned her. And she started, doing background like a good journalist would. And then she started hearing these stories about women and had called some of them. And they were willing to talk to her very reluctantly. But I believe she said 3 of them did. And that all of a sudden, this story turned for her. And she said that she realized what she had. And what she had was an expose on Jeffrey Epstein over these women. And she started...
Who was she working for at the time?
She was writing for Vanity Fair.
And did Vanity Fair kill it?
Well, let me tell you what happened. So Epstein starts to get wind of what she's doing. And this goes to Epstein's personality, because I've heard this from a number of people in doing this documentary, that Epstein would laser in on people's weaknesses, and he would do it in a really effective way. And that's one of the ways he kept people. And Vicky was pregnant with twins at the time. And Epstein said to her that if you write a negative story on me, I am going to get a witch doctor to put a hex on your unborn children. And I am going to get your husband fired. And this was real talk. I mean, this was not, some guy. She tells stories about all of the interactions she had with him. And it's really, really stunning. And you're going to see some of this in the documentary. But
who was her husband at the time? And
he was not a famous person. But
okay.
But and who knows whether he could. But I'll tell you something. And I'm going to tell you what happened with her pregnancy after I tell you what happened with Vanity Fair. That she ended up going to Vanity Fair, the editor-in-chief there, and she says that she laid out what she had, and the next thing she had heard was that Jeffrey Epstein paid a visit to the Vanity Fair offices. And then someone her editor sent her the draft of her article. And all of that stuff about the women, she says, was taken out. And they said to her that this was just going to be a financial type profile and not about any of that other stuff.
Because Vanity Fair is a noted financial magazine, go-to magazine 20 years ago.
Well, she had what she said was the goods, and they killed that. And it was so incredibly stressful and upsetting to her that she ended up having her twins prematurely. They were 2 pounds each, and they ended up in the NIC unit, NIC ICU for months. And, it just rocked her world. But it just showed this power and influence that Jeffrey Epstein had. This episode of Two Angry Men is brought to you by Incogni. It's shocking to find out how much of your personal information is online. And it's not by chance. Data brokers and people search sites collect your personal information, your name, address, phone number, financial information, income, and they sell it and share it publicly without your consent. Incogni is here to put an end to that. Now, using Incogni feels like finally reclaiming your personal space, but online. No more random calls, no more unnecessary exposure, just more peace of mind knowing your data is handled. Now let's talk about the benefits. The first benefit, Incogni has introduced something big. It's called custom data removals. With their unlimited plan, you can copy and paste any link where your information appears, even on sites outside their usual list. And then Incogni's privacy team steps in and they handle the removal for you. They actually do the work manually, even with sites that are harder to deal with. It's like having, a privacy SWAT team on speed dial. Another benefit, if you care about the law like we do, you probably value public records and transparency. Now, the issue, legal information that used to be accessible in context is now scraped by data brokers, repackaged, and sold. And that can affect hiring, insurance, even search results. Incogni uses privacy laws like GDPR and CCPA to contact data brokers to request removal of your information from commercial databases, giving you full control over how your name appears online. Because legal systems should protect your rights, not turn your past into profit. So you can get 60% off annual plans at incogni.com/angry with code ANGRY at checkout. It's risk-free. Incogni offers a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not fully satisfied. You can live free from dangerous spam with Incogni. That's incogni.com/angry for 60% off annual plans. What we found in this was that he was just a master at figuring out, what a person's weakness was, and that, you start looking at Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, and you look at, Alan Dershowitz, who talked to us for this documentary about how this.
Alan have to say, because I have not talked to Alan since all this came out, and I consider Alan a friend. I've known him for, God knows, over 25 years. And there are things about the files that I've now seen that I do have a lot of questions that I'd love to talk to him about.
Yeah, no, he was really open with me and talked about, how he got involved in this. And the way Alan got involved was that the president of Harvard, Larry Summers, said to him, look, Epstein has contributed a ton of money, and that I want you to have a 15, 20-minute conversation with him. And at first, Dershowitz didn't want to do it. And finally, he said, okay, I'll do it. And they had, they walked on the beach, I think he said. And Epstein looked at him and said, I'm having a birthday party. I think he said a 50th birthday party for Lex Wexner. And it's going to be
as Tim Dillon would say, friend of the show. But go on.
Yeah, and that they were going to have this, I think, in Rhode Island. And he said, "Why don't you come on my airplane to Rhode Island?" And just so you know, Senator John Glenn is going to be in the plane. Former Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres is going to be in the plane. So he's name dropping, and Dershowitz did it. And he went. And then all of a sudden, Epstein's coming to Harvard and doing talks, and Dershowitz is a part of that. And look, he denies that the allegations of Virginia Dufresne about having sex with her. He says it never happened. He feels very strongly about that. But he does kind of admit, he said, my wife said to me, this guy's going to get in trouble someday. And he said his wife saw it, but he just didn't see it coming.
No, it's amazing you say that. And I say this first in full transparency. I really am fond of Alan, and I've, like I said, I've known him forever, and but I do have questions. But it's interesting you say that about his wife, because famously I've heard this from others that the women have had, don't want to be sexist, but have had like Bill Gates's wife.
Oh, Melinda said he was the devil. As soon as she saw him, said, this guy is evil.
It's amazing the sixth sense that they have had, various women, and there's others that I can't disclose, but I will tell you also what they have said in terms of this, that there were a lot of women who Epstein was using not just as kind of props, so to speak, or trafficking in, but there were grown adult women who were, for lack of a better term, aiding and abetting what he was doing, and deep in co-conspirators. And I'm not talking about Maxwell. I'm saying if you go through the files, and I talked to your producers before we got on here, I said, I've seen emails of women, adult women who were in there actively co-conspiring with him, and I use that term in the legal sense, as to how to ensnare. They have males that they target. If you go through and you kind of follow some of these threads, and I've had to do it in my day job, but it's astonishing to me the accomplices that he had that I never expected, and thought I thought what was being said before the files were dropped and what I now can see in real time I admit, I never saw a lot of this coming.
Well, you know what Vicky Ward told me? That yes, what you say absolutely happened, but these were women who were initially victims of Jeffrey Epstein, where it's almost like a cult that they ended up recruiting. And it's true, but it's not like he just found a group of women that would do it. These were women who he first, abused, and then was able to, again, this guy, it's so interesting because we interviewed people from his childhood to when he was teaching at the Dalton School to, when he was a financial guy.
School, for those who aren't in the weeds on this, to me, it just, besides Les Wexner, the idea that he was hired at the Dalton School by the headmaster there as basically a dropout. And not
basically, he was. Yeah, it was William Barr's father, but he wasn't basically
the attorney general at the time that the investigation into his death took place.
He went to college for 2 years, dropped out. You talk to people about what he was like growing up, and they say remarkably unremarkable. And that there was nothing special about this guy except he had this drive to be rich. And that was his motivation. You know why he was forced out of the Dalton School, right? He was using the students to make contacts with their wealthy parents. And exactly he was pushed out because of that.
By the way, the one thing, circling back, that I want to talk to Alan about on this, and I don't know if you asked him, before the drop of the files, Alan was adamant that there was, and by the way, you and I talked about this, and you kind of pushed back a little on me on this.
On what?
Alan was adamant that he was not an asset, I'm not using that as a term, an intelligence asset, and that if he had been an intelligence asset, and there's a strict definition of what that means, that he would have known, and he would have used that, Alan would have used that in his plea negotiations, which, as somebody who has been in countless plea negotiations, I understand that completely. In fact, I have actually negotiated plea deals and charges being dropped for people who were intelligence assets. So everything, when Alan tells me that, it rings so true. I believe it. After seeing the files now, and I have talked to people who are lifelong operatives, for lack of a better term, who say they are stunned as well, and that it has all the earmarks of somebody who was an asset, active asset.
Well, you know what's interesting about that? Do you know about Ghislaine Maxwell's father?
Yes.
Ghislaine Maxwell's father was a world spy. He spied for multiple countries, and he was a bad guy. And he is the guy who knew everybody. And Ghislaine Maxwell had his Rolodex, and that that Ghislaine was using that Rolodex to help Jeffrey Epstein create that circle that he had of all of these people. But, her dad was really kind of set the groundwork for that. It's interesting. He died in 1991, which is the year.
And how did he die, Harvey?
Well, under suspicious circumstances. And it was the year that Jeffrey Epstein met Ghislaine.
Yeah. And people have also, as you say, not just a world class, but he was connected to intelligence agencies, and it's
all over the world. All over the world.
All over the world. It's exactly right. And that's why it's hard for me to believe, now having seen these files, that there wasn't backup. And what people have to understand in terms of being an asset, and this is, I'm talking from my own experience, what that means is that you're used by the whatever agency it is. And I've had people who've been used by the FBI, I've had people who've been used by the CIA, and even down to, believe it or not, Secret Service at certain points. It doesn't mean that you're documented, so to speak, but you're keeping them informed in real time, and there's a reciprocity and a cover that is engaged in. It's really a dance that goes on, that you take a look at these files, and to me, it's unmistakable. It resonates that he clearly was an asset, if not more, because he had the backup and the wherewithal and this web that was wild, and was using it to try to ensnare people. There are so many people contained in this file, or in the files, that were near misses. And I will tell you, one of the things I think that we've gone kind of a little too much to, and I say it, I don't know him personally, but Casey Wasserman comes to mind. I've looked at the files, and I'm interested, obviously, as being somebody who's vitally interested in Los Angeles and what goes on here. And Casey Wasserman, for those who don't know it, is a world-class agent with an agency who has been ensnared and is headed,
and the president of the Olympic Committee 2028.
Yeah, president of the Olympic Committee, they've hired outside law firms to investigate, and people have kind of swept him up in this. But when you look at what he's actually doing, he's had the worst case scenario, at least based on what I've seen, is he's somebody who was purportedly having an affair with Ghislaine Maxwell, and
before Epstein.
Correct. And commenting on her black leather pants.
Right.
I mean, let's distill that down. I mean, there's nothing more than that. But this guy's world has been rocked. Absolutely rocked. Like I said, I haven't talked to him. I don't know him. I know a lot of people in common, or we know a lot of people in common. But that, to me, there is a lesson there to be learned, in that if he is being cultivated, and anybody who was around in those days knows that he was a young man in a hurry, so to speak, to use the old expression, or somebody, to your point, who was being cultivated. And a near miss, but look at how he's been tainted.
Yeah, no, people assume that this has got to be in the center of Epstein Maxwell, and it wasn't. It was
Right.
before it was Ghislaine. Um, I know that's right. And, it's interesting because, one of the people we talked to is Dr. Phil in this documentary. And he's really right. He said, once you step on that airplane, and again, this is not really Casey because as far as I know, there's no reference of Casey and Jeffrey Epstein at all in the
Correct.
files. In the
Correct.
files.
But the guys had to be forced. He's hired an investment banker to sell his asset.
Right.
What he built, and now he's on the. Somebody who's been doing a stellar job on the committee is trying to be forced out.
Yeah. Dr. Phil said this, and it really is interesting. It's like, how does Bill Clinton end up in that swimming pool with Ghislaine Maxwell, with what Bill Clinton went through with Monica Lewinsky and impeachment and everything else? How does he end up there? Phil said, once first of all, he says, did you notice that somebody had a camera and they were taking pictures? And he said, once they take a picture or you step on that jet or you step on that island, he owned you. He owned you. And he was a master of blackmail and extortion. I mean, it is so deep what he did. And yet, when you ask people about him, I asked Dershowitz, how intelligent was he? And Dershowitz said he was really street smart, not book smart. And nobody I talked to said, oh, he's just an intellect, he's brilliant, anything like that. That this guy was a street smart, some of the people said a thug, a blackmailer, an extortionist. And yet he was able to assemble this group. Mark, I've never seen, the more I look at this, from royalty to presidents to, titans of industry, it's mind-boggling looking at this guy who didn't really shine. He didn't shine socially. He didn't shine intellectually. He did a lot of this stuff with smoke and mirrors. And, it's not who he met. It's who can I meet who can introduce me to the next person. And that's the way he created this. But somehow he managed to create this Rolodex that was shocking. Shocking.
Well, it's interesting that and we didn't talk about this before we got on today, because one of the things that I think there's so much titillation around the files itself that I think the main story is lost as to what you just talked about. That thread that's through all of this idea of trying to ensnare people, this idea of kind of this 3 degrees of separation to use the people. And I hadn't thought about deep enough about the idea of taking the abuser and kind of the Stockholm syndrome and using them to ensnare.
Mm-hmm.
But because there's so many tentacles to the people who did get ensnared, that the people who didn't have been kind of slimed by this. And because that's so scandalous and titillating, we've kind of lost sight of what was going on at the core of this and what kind of an operation this was. And by the way, who was running this thing? Was it just him? Was he?
Oh, Ghislaine Maxwell was so involved in a lot of this. I mean, she was so critical to his world. So critical to his world that, I know there have been a lot of allegations, but based on, what we've seen and heard in this documentary, do not underestimate her contribution to all of this. Seriously. Which just makes
remarkable to me, though. It's based on the files themselves, how many other women were involved in kind of laying traps, so to speak, or trying to ensnare men and going out there and kind of reporting back to him. I mean, that's the eerie thing about this. I mean, there's emails there where I want to meet this guy, or I want to see if I can make some noise on that guy. Or I mean, it's very disconcerting when you look at it as to kind of this confederacy or conspiracy, if you will. And what did you do in the documentary to see what agencies knew what and at what point?
Um, we don't get into agencies as much as we do the people who are involved in all of this. And when you look at the Lex Wexners, and you know, uh, Alan and Prince Andrew and a lot of them, and Donald Trump and all of them, you know, the way Vicky put it, and I thought she was just brilliant, that there was a lot of willful blindness. And, a lot of this was, who am I circulating with? I asked Alan, were you intoxicated by, his offer to fly you with John Glenn and Shimon Peres and all that? And he said, look, and he said, I went to a dinner party and I saw Prince Andrew there. He said, I never met a prince. I said, well, were you intoxicated? And he thought about it and he said, I don't know that I was intoxicated as much as I was interested. It was interesting. And so he used that. I hear two different stories. One is he became really reclusive and didn't have a lot of parties after he was convicted in Florida. But then I hear other stories that, he got the biggest penthouse in the city of New York, the biggest. I think it was 20 plus rooms.
Right.
And that he would have parties there, and that, he could assemble a group where people wanted to be in that group. And New York society is peculiar. It's much different than LA, where I don't think, I think it exists some in Hollywood, but it not nearly like New York. Who gets invited to the parties? Barbara Walters used to have these huge parties, where she would pick a politician and, a financier and a so-and-so and a so-and-so. And that was a party to be at. He would try to do the same thing. And
It's so funny you say that, because my father used to remark about how parochial, in the strict sense of the word parochial, New York is when you think about it. And he embodied that, what you just described. He would cultivate scientists, academics, and kind of have these, what I would refer to as a salon in the sense of what used to happen in Paris at the turn of the century. And that kind of interest, to Alan's point, he was interested. It was intriguing. It was intellectually intriguing or appealing, I suppose. And you're so right about that. Does appeal to a certain strata.
in a big way. I mean, that, in DC and New York, it's what parties are you invited to? And that will define your social status in the city. And New York was like that. And he knew it and he used it. I got to tell you something else. I got to tell you a great story. So we interviewed somebody who spent hours in the Metropolitan Detention Center talking to Jeffrey Epstein, an inmate. And he's out now, and he's a brilliant guy. He's really smart. And they talked for hours and hours and hours. And when you see the documentary, some of the stories that you're going to hear are just wild. I mean,
What was he in for?
Huh? I'm not sure exactly. I think it was a white collar type thing. The guy's brilliant, and he to Jeffrey Epstein's last day, he was a con man, and they had talked and talked and talked, and at one point, Jeffrey Epstein said to him, "You've been such a good friend to me," and this was almost the couple of days before he died. "You've been such a good friend to me. Would you let me put some money on your books?" And the guy said, "Why would I turn down a billionaire, right?" And so he said, "I'll do it." And we asked him, so did he end up putting money on the books? And he said, he did not. He did not. So to his last day.
He did. But did you ask this particular gentleman whether he believed that he would commit suicide?
Oh, yes. And
Am
he
I going to step on the lead
no,
if
but
you ask me
I will
into
tell
it?
you, he tells a story that and by the way, when you hear him, I don't think there's really a question. Do you believe him? Yes. I mean, this guy is such a straight shooter. So he says it's absolutely suicide, that there were people in the facility, inmates, who heard things in that, where Jeffrey Epstein was. And the things he heard, and I'm not going to say it now because you got to watch a documentary, but the things he heard with sheets and whatnot were things that were utterly consistent with suicide. So, he was there. And he talked to Epstein and told me about the night before he died, this resignation in Jeffrey Epstein that he saw and things he did. And again, we have this in the doc, but things he did that he says he has no doubt that this was not a murder, this was a suicide. I know there are others who
And
think differently.
was he interviewed by the authorities?
I don't know that. I do not know the answer to that. I don't know that the authorities I don't know how extensive their interview was, because to them it seemed pretty obvious that it was a suicide. Now, again, I don't know.
Yeah,
I wasn't there.
Yeah, coming full circle to Bill Barr, who was the attorney general, whose dad had hired him at the Dalton School.
Right.
Do you remember how lit up Bill Barr was when this happened, or at least by appearance's sake? I mean, when I say lit up, he was agitated, and this is not normally a guy who shows his emotions. He was agitated that this happened on his watch. At least that was the perception.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Can I tell you one last story with Dershowitz? I didn't know this, but Dershowitz was part of his legal team, Epstein's legal team,
along with Ken Starr, who was the independent counsel, now dead, who prosecuted Bill Clinton.
Right. Well, Dershowitz was very involved in it, and Epstein had asked him to be part of the legal team, and he did. And he said
a hell of a, by the way, as a postscript, Alan got him a hell of a deal. And by all accounts, Epstein was never happy with that deal.
Well, that's the point I was going to make. I got the account from Alan. Alan said that Epstein hated him after that deal. That Epstein told him, he said, you screwed me over. Any decent lawyer would have gotten no time. Any decent lawyer would have made it so he wasn't a sex offender. And that from that moment, the deal that everybody now views, which it was, as a sweetheart deal, Epstein viewed as a travesty and blamed it on Alan Dershowitz and hated him from that day forward.
So, as somebody who has done my share of criminal defense going into my 5th decade, I can't tell you the number of times where I think, pulled a rabbit out of a hat for a client on something where they were facing the rest of their life, and they, in real time, didn't realize it. I've had the pleasurable experience recently of running into people who I've actually forgotten about, who have thanked me profusely. But I know for a fact that he was angry as all get out at Alan for that deal, that he thought that was a lousy deal.
Yep.
I think the term was used, one of my favorite terms, that Alan was a dump truck, which is usually directed at public defenders who I think do God's work. But he was not happy with that deal at all and was angry, felt like Alan had dumped him, so to speak.
I'm going to talk about this documentary in the next couple of weeks, but I can't wait for people to see it. Anyway.
Oh, wait, do I get an advance copy? Why do I have to do this podcast without having seen it?
Because I just love you off the cuff. Okay, have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks, Harvey.
Bye.